fuss and pray. I can talk another time easily. So how many of you woke up an hour early this morning like I did? I had my alarm clock set for 7:30 so I can get up and pray and study this morning. And I woke up at 7:30 on my desk clock, and I was like, oh, it's time to get up. And then I started looking at my phone and things. I was like, I'm up an hour early. So I got extra coffee and extra prayer time this morning, and I got to aggravate my wife a little extra. So there you go. Just thank God for the extra hour. So, but this week we're still doing our study, and we're kind of wrapping up. This month is kind of the wrapping up of our study in Revelations. The lesson this week starts in chapter 17 of Revelations, and I was studying this the first time I looked at it this week, and I was like, I feel like there's something missing, because we kind of jump in here halfway through something, and then I realized that the lesson skipped 2 chapters. So I'm going back. So I'm going to go back 2 chapters, because I feel like that the chapters before this, even though everything's important, I feel like it kind of sets the stage for this next little piece. The thing about John is, and I'm going to be jumping back. You don't have to turn back. I'm just going to quickly cover it. But the thing that we see at the first of chapter 15 is that John receives another sign. It says, "Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete." So we see that John has seen all these visions coming down, and they're all, and it says at the beginning of each vision, I had another vision. So here we see in chapter 15 that he sees 7 angels that have 7 bowls. And we see at the beginning, we've seen that we had the 7 seals, which only Jesus could open. And then we had 7 trumpets that the angels come out and blew. Well, these are all different prophecies, but they stand for the same thing. This stuff doesn't keep going over and over and over and over and over again, but he's seeing the same events happen in several different ways. And you can even break it down to far as saying, well, the 7 seals was big picture stuff. The 7 seals possibly has taken place over thousands of years. It talks about when Jesus first come out, that he was the sacrificed lamb that could have been the first seal that was opened when Jesus was actually resurrected and taken back into heaven. And we see these seals open throughout since then. And then you have a little more narrow view of what's going to happen, and we see the 7 trumpets. And I missed a couple services, so I missed the 7 trumpets somehow altogether. But we can see that the 7 trumpets, if you look in, have already started, and it's been the past couple hundred years that these angels have been blowing these trumpets. Mm-hmm. We say World War I is one of them. World War II is one of them. The first Gulf War is one of them. We see these trumpets being blown down, 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 down within the past couple hundred years, ramping up. One of the trumpets, I think it was trumpet 5, it talks about the shortening of days. And if I'm wrong, you guys wave at me. Here recently, scientists have realized that the earth is speeding up. And when the earth speeds up, what happens to the days? They get shorter. And it's just here recently that we've noticed, hey, the days are getting shorter. That's biblical prophecy, that the Lord has shortened the days. So we're starting to see these trumpets blow. And as the time closes down, we're looking for a couple more. If you want to go with some of my sources, and I'm not going to get into all going back and stuff. But we're looking for a couple more of these trumpets to blow. One is going to be a great and final terrible world war, which is probably going to be nuclear in some ways because of all the people that die. And then the 7th trumpet we talked about is the coming of Jesus. When the 7th trumpet blows, Jesus is going to come down to heaven, and he's going to touch Mount Sinai, and it's going to split, and there's going to be a great earthquake. So all this, we see all this coming up. Well, then we see these 7 angels with these 7 bowls. This isn't a time after. This happens right in the middle. And some of the sources that I look up, because I've looked at all kinds of different stuff, think that these 7 bowls are going to be poured out in the last 7 years. So the last 7 years of tribulation we're going to go through, and we see these 7 angels with these 7 bowls, and they're going to start pouring out plagues during the tribulation time, and we're going to see all this stuff happen. And we kind of see in chapter 16, it kind of goes over some of the plagues that are going to be poured out. We see the first bowl the first bowl is sores. This is kind of like Egypt kind of stuff. The people are going to come up with sores. The second one is the seas are going to turn to blood. The third one is the waters are going to turn to blood. Then men are going to be scorched. The power of the sun is going to be poured out, and people are going to be just scorched up and burn up. Then we see darkness is going to be poured out. Then we see that the Euphrates River is going to dry up. So all these things we haven't seen yet, but we know they're coming, and they're possibly going to be coming in the last 7 years. What we consider the tribulation years. So then we come to, and this is kind of thrown back, and we kind of come around full circle, and we see again in chapter 17, which is where we pick up today, we see again the beast. He comes up again. We've seen him time and time again come up and do these different things. Well, we see again this week in this final hour, these final last few minutes of the last bit of this earth, we see this beast come up. And in chapter 17, we kind of see what he's going to be, kind of a different look of how he's going to look different and what he's going to do that's going to be different. We kind of seen pictures of him coming down through Revelations, but every time we see a picture of him, we get a different aspect of what it's going to be. Does that make sense? So we see a little picture of him up here, and then we see a little picture of him kind of in the middle, and then we see a little picture over here. It's the same beast. We're just looking at him through different prophecies, through different visions that John has. And because it's a different vision, it looks a little different. So then we see in chapter 17, it says, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls, which we talked about in the previous chapter, one of the 7 angels, said to me, come and I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her kings of the earth committed adultery. Let's see, am I right? Does that make sense? Yeah. The kings of the earth who committed adultery and inhabited the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. And the angel carried me away into the spirit, into the wilderness. And there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. So there we go. That's the beast. So there's this woman sitting in the wilderness on top of this beast. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She had a golden cup in her hand and filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. And written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Where I saw her, I was greatly astonished. So we see this woman sitting on top of this beast in the wilderness. And like I said before, the beast, and I'm not 100% sure, there's no way to be 100% sure about Revelations. But there's a good chance that this beast is still the same beast, and it represents a global power. It's set on top of 7 hills, it has 7 heads, it represents 10 kings, and this body is the same body we've seen earlier, that the lion and all that. So we see this beast that represents a global power or one world government. And on top of this beast, we see this great prostitute, and they call her Babylon. Now, we can get down in a nitty-picky and we can try to figure this out, and we can say, well, Babylon was a city, and it probably is, and it may even come down that Babylon is somehow associated, and maybe even the capital of this one world government that sits on top of it. But you have to look at it a couple of different ways, because we want to know. And we want concrete evidence, and we want the Bible to open up and tell us exactly what's going on and how it's going to be. But unfortunately, Revelations doesn't always read like that. We don't always get, this is when this is going to happen, and this is what this is going to mean, and this is definitely a city. So we kind of have to look at it a couple of different ways. Fortunately, here we can kind of see one of the angels come to John, and he kind of fills him in. And even though that we can think about this as a physical place with a physical kingdom, we also have to look at what Babylon stood for. And Babylon, I think I said it last week, was absolutely the most wicked place of its time. It was built on the side of Babel, the Tower of Babel. They were rebellious against God. They persecuted God's people all through time. This was an evil, evil place, and it represented an evil mindset, a very anti-God, a very anti-Jewish Semitic mindset, and still a very anti-Christian mindset. So this could represent a specific place, or it could represent the mindset of the people that are going to be at this time. I've kind of liked I don't always like it, but I kind of like how the book summed it up. So I'm just going to read what the book had to say about it, and just remember that this is a mindset that the people have, and we still have this. Still have this spirit of this great prostitute, this spirit of Babylon, even today that we can see. And it says in the book, it says, the heart of sin is selfishness. When we become consumed with ourselves, we cannot be aligned with God. This is the point of Genesis 3. It also explains Paul's emphasis on selfishness. It says, value others above yourself, and Paul wrote that in Philippians. Why would a prostitute be the epitome of selfishness? Sexuality is a strong, vital, central part of humanity. Human sexuality goes beyond instinct and beyond the need to survive. Our sexuality is an expression of who we are, created in God's image to give ourselves one to another. This is why Paul said sexual sin is internal, unlike other sins, which is external. When we use sexuality to control others, or when we are so blinded by our passions, we lose the ability to live rationally. We are consumed with ourselves. We indulge in mystery. Life has been revealed to us. The life that's been revealed to us is not interesting. We need more. We need to have the ultimate fantasy. We unveil the ultimate experience. Reality is opposed to such thinking. Fantasy is a creation of our own minds, a mental idol. Since we seek the ultimate fantasy, we dress it with wealth. Remember, she was dwelling all kind of wealth and stuff, seeking the ease to pursue our selfish drives. We seek fortune or security for our lusts. Babylon the Great was the wealthiest city in the ancient Near East at one time, not only housing wealth, but every pleasure imaginable, all available for the right price. When we live to have work to buy, or to give to receive, we enter in the realm of the mother of prostitutes. It is not simply a matter of not committing sexual sin, practicing prostitution, that's at stake. We must avoid seeking meaning in life by fulfilling our own desires. The same is true of wealth. It is not simply a matter of not being rich. It is a matter of not using our wealth to oppress, subjugate, and manipulate others. Ultimately, selfishness brings self-absorbed, lead us into the realm of the mother of abominations of earth. When we see the oppression, the slavery, the poverty, and the genocide around the world in our time, it is difficult to imagine the abominations of the earth being anything else. Crimes against humanity cause the ground to cry out. Indeed, the great prostitute was drunk with the blood of God's holy people. The rest of the world was drunk with the wine of adulteries. This is not simply a scene of great religious persecution, or even the martyrdom of Christians. This is a scene of selfish lies against a selfless truth. The truth will be a victor. Sometimes the ultimate victory requires temporal sacrifice. Sometimes our best witness is not what we say, but how we live it, looking not only our own interests, but also to the interests of others. That's a big mouthful, but it shows back to that Babylonian spirit, this spirit of greed, this spirit of just wanting, and never giving. And when we do give, we want to receive. But that's what it all comes down to. And that's why this is the great mother. That's why it's the great mother. And that's why she's seated on this great unholy beast. So we see her reflected several times throughout Scripture. And we see this imagery of this great woman, this great harlot sitting on the beast. But, like we see earlier, there's a punishment coming for her. We see it several times throughout Revelations when Jesus comes back, that there's going to be a punishment for her. And we'll see that this great harlot has a punishment for her coming too later in these verses. And then it says in chapter 7, this is a lot for me to read today. Then it says over in verse 7, it says, the angel said to me, why are you astonished? Because remember, he was astonished. He was so taken aback by this scene of this just godless woman. He was so astonished by it. He said, why are you so astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. So then again, we get this picture of this beast again. The beast which you saw was and now is not, and yet will come out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life, the book of life from creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is, not, and will come. This calls for the mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, and the other has not yet come. So this is a prophecy of these kings. We've seen this a couple of different times. We know that these horns or these heads are going to represent different kingdoms that's going to come up through time, and some of them have already come, and some of them are still coming, but it still represents the same. There are also 7 kings. Let's see, I've read that. The beast who once was and now is not is the 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. So we kind of see the angel set up this idea that this beast is some sort of government or some sort of kingdom that's going to establish itself. Then in verse 12 it says, the 10 horns you saw are the 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but for one hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have purpose and will, and give their power and authority to the beast, and they will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and with him will be called chosen and faithful followers. Okay, so we see again this beast, and we can beat it and go over and over and over, but it represents earthly kingdoms. This represents the work of man and how we build each other up and how we go through life and we have these things and we worship these things. The key to understand the beast in this passage is the description once was and now is not and yet will come. This is intentional distinction from the description of Christ, him who is, who was, and who is to come. Remember, everything the devil does is almost always opposite of Jesus. So we see this beast who was, that is no more, that isn't going to come, and then we see that reflecting in Jesus, him who is, who was, and who is to come. Does that make sense? Everybody tracking with me so far? This one's kind of thick bread to cut through today, but sometimes
he's the Antichrist.
Yeah.
He's the Antichrist, and he tries to copy Jesus, and he comes, and then he dies, and then he resurrects himself.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is
That's it.
Right.
Antichrist, the beast is.
And he does these things to deceive people,
Mm-hmm.
because he's just enough like Christ that people will follow him off and do whatever that he wants them to do. But we've talked about time and time again, those that are in Christ will know his voice and will be able to outsmart him and know better. But there's going to be multitudes, and we've seen it with the last section with the 666 and the stamp. There's going to be millions of people that are going to fall for this.
Mm-hmm.
By this point in time, we've seen enough to see in Revelations that people are going to be looking for answers. They've seen earthquakes. They've seen fire rain from the sky. They've seen rivers turn to blood. They've seen everything. And I don't care who you are, when you start seeing these things, you're going to realize that somebody else is in charge. And that this isn't something that's natural. It's going to be something that's supernatural. And that people are going to start looking for answers. And we're going to start seeing that these Antichrists and all his followers and these people that have all these marks, they're going to start deceiving people by probably millions of people. They're going to be deceived, and they're going to flock to the side of these people. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very, very careful in these last days to look for false prophets, to look for people that are going to draw away the people, because they're going to seem so much like Christ, but there's going to be just small differences, and it's going to be enough in small differences to lead you away. So be very, very, very careful of during this time. We see that 2 descriptions subjugate temporal power to eternal power. It once was speaks to humanity's tendency to look at past glories and try to reinstate them. So once was. That is not as humanity's unwillingness to look beyond itself and temporal world to find meaning. That will come is the reality of the decline of the world, in which everything passing away, and even the beast comes, and it comes out of the abyss and goes to its destruction. Another distinction is found in the followers of the beast and the followers of the Lamb. The followers of the beast are astonished because time does not simply apply to the beast, even though centuries of power are destroyed. So we see, and I just kind of lost, just my mind went blank. I'm just going to keep reading. However, those who follow the Lamb sees things differently. They are called, they are constituted, they are faithful to the Lamb. For them, time does not change. What is today is the same yesterday and will be the same tomorrow. So where we see the followers of the beast, and time seems like it's always different, as Christians, we're going to be following Christ, and everything is always the same. And the outcome of that, and we kind of see it throughout Revelations, is there's always a victorious time. And that's never going to change.
Right.
There's never going to be a time where these beasts rise up out of the oceans or the sea or wherever they come from that they're ever going to be victorious. They're going to wail and gnash their teeth, and they're going to make you seem like that they're going to win. But in the end, when that final trumpet blows, I think there's a song about that. We're going to see when the final trumpet blows, Jesus is going to be the one that comes back, and he's going to come back as the victorious. So then we're going to jump over to 15, and we're just about ready to wrap up. Yeah, we got a few more minutes. And it said, "Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw, where the prostitute sits, are the people, or the multitudes, nations, and languages." So we see the many waters. This just isn't Christians. This is going to be everybody. The people, the multitudes, and nations include our influence of the universe, of universal. It may refers to governments that partner with evil. So everybody is going to kind of be around this thing because it's a global event. It's going to be global. So the waters we see this thing sitting on are people. It's not water, it's people. So the beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute, and they will bring her to ruin and leave her naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's work is fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So there we see her again portrayed as the great city of Babylon that rules over the world. But if you read the rest of that, we see that these kings are going to turn against her. And I think, like I said, I like how the book kind of trying to track with these verses this week. So I'm going to read what the book has to say, and it kind of makes a lot of sense once you hear it all. Evil will always slay the wicked. This is Psalms. This is Psalms 34, 21 through 22. Evil will always slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants, and no one will take refuge in him will be condemned. Thus, it is not surprising to see the beast and the 10 horns turn on the prostitute, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Evil has only one path, and that's destruction. This includes self-destruction. The gains made through wickedness cannot protect the wicked from themselves. Selfishness eventually consumes everything, and when all else is consumed, selfishness consumes itself. So it's so intent and bent on destroying everything around it that eventually it turns on itself. So these kings and these kingdoms are all going to turn against this great prostitute, and that's going to be part of her punishment. They're going to drag her out in the streets. They're going to burn the city down, wherever it may be, and it's going to be a punishment, and it's going to be something that God put in them, because all things work for the purpose that God makes them out to be. Everything. Even wicked people. You can see time and time again in the Bible and how the Israelites were punished, and I go over this a lot if you ever hear me talk a lot, about how the Israelites would go their own way for a while, and then all of a sudden this nation would come in out of nowhere and attack them and drag them off. Well, that's God working. He's working and coercing these places to come out and dish out his judgment on Israel. And it's the same here. He's working with these kings to dish out his judgment on this thing, because all things are accomplished through God's will. Let's see, let me keep going here. I think I might be done. Let me see, I've read that. Here is where the righteousness must continue to walk by faith and not by sight. The Lamb will overcome, not because of anything he does, but simply because of who he is. This is the difference. People who expect God to act in a certain manner in order to assure their belief is not understand who God is. The Lamb is the Lord of all creation. From truth comes his victory. Again, this calls for a mind of wisdom. So there again, we see that calls back. And we get bits and pieces of it. We read and study. And sometimes we reread and restudy. And Revelations is one of those books that you can probably read 1,000,000 times and not understand all the symbolism that goes into it. And the book might be right. This book might be right. It could be the farthest thing that we know, because we don't know. So as we close out this week, just think about it and try to reread this passage and go over it. And I always encourage people to reread the things that we go over. Pray about it. See what God has to tell you. He shows me things that's not in here. He shows me things that I would never even think about, because I have a heart to read and know. He reveals it to you. So as we close this week, I want Brother Gardner to pray us out. My mind's all different kinds of directions today. I've been kind of sick this week. I've got this job, and for some reason the guys want to run around all the time with the windows down and smoke. Then I'm sitting in the back seat with all this smoke and the windows down, and my ears have been so sore and my ear throat all week. I'm like, it's cold. Roll up the window. Come on. So I'm kind of itchy and scratchy this morning. I have been all week. But just go ahead and pray for us out this morning.
Father, what a great day it is to walk with you. For Father, you have made preparations for each one of us as we travel this journey. Lord, we realize without you we'd surely not make it. We thank you for your word today. Help us to take it to our heart and build upon it for the future. If you would do these things, Lord, I'd appreciate it. I'll give you praise. Man.